Nobody warns you that raising your children can quietly start over again in your 50s, this time without anyone calling it parenting, and without anyone mentioning what it might cost you the second time around. This is the story of a woman named Teresa, a spare bedroom that never stayed empty, and the retirement fund that slowly became a household budget nobody had agreed to. Before we get into it, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because here we tell honest stories about money, love, and the blurry line between helping the people we raised and quietly funding a future we're supposed to be building for ourselves. In a modest townhouse outside Charlotte, a 56-year-old woman named Teresa Alvarez had spent 3 decades as an elementary school administrator, the kind of steady career that never made her rich, but always made her reliable. Teresa raised 2 children mostly on her own after her divorce nearly 20 years earlier, and she'd always been proud of the fact that both of them, Jordan and Maya, grew up independent, capable, unafraid of hard work. When Jordan, 26, called 2 years ago asking to stay just for a couple months while he sorted out a rough patch after a layoff, Teresa didn't hesitate. That's what mothers do, she told herself. A couple months turned into a year. The rough patch turned into a series of short-term jobs that never quite covered his half of anything. At first, Teresa didn't think of it as a financial arrangement at all. She simply covered groceries a little more generously, kept the thermostat running the way it used to when both kids lived at home, picked up the occasional car repair or phone bill without mentioning it, telling herself it was temporary. The kind of bridge any decent parent builds without keeping score. Then Maya, 23, moved back in 8 months later after a relationship ended, bringing a modest amount of student loan debt and an income that barely covered her own car payment, let alone rent. Within a year, Teresa's 3-bedroom townhouse held 3 adults, 3 sets of expenses, and 1 paycheck doing most of the heavy lifting. She never sat down and calculated the actual monthly cost of it. Not really, not with real numbers on paper. She just noticed, vaguely, that her automatic retirement contribution kept getting reduced whenever the budget felt tight. First from 12% down to 8%, then eventually down to 4%. A decision she made each time in isolated moments of short-term pressure, never once stepping back to see the pattern accumulating underneath. The full picture arrived, as it often does, through someone else's casual comment rather than her own initiative. At a work retirement seminar Teresa attended mostly out of obligation, a financial advisor projected a slide showing average retirement savings by age alongside recommended contribution percentages. Teresa did quick mental math against her own current contribution rate and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She was 56, contributing 4%, nearly a decade behind where she'd been just 3 years earlier, and she hadn't consciously decided any of it. It had happened one reasonable-sounding exception at a time. That evening, Teresa finally pulled every bank and credit card statement from the past 2 years into one spreadsheet, something she'd been avoiding without fully admitting why. The number stared back at her plainly. Nearly $31,000 redirected from what would have been retirement contributions and personal savings into groceries, utilities, car repairs, and small loans to her adult children that were never structured as loans at all, simply absorbed into the household as though they were her own expenses. Teresa didn't confront Jordan or Maya that night. She sat alone at her kitchen table with the spreadsheet open, replaying 2 years of small, individually reasonable decisions that had quietly compounded into something much larger than any single moment would have suggested. She wasn't angry at her children exactly. She was frightened by how completely she'd lost track of her own future while trying to hold theirs together. Here's the trap that catches so many devoted parents almost without their noticing. Helping an adult child rarely feels like a financial decision in the moment it happens. It feels like love, like the natural continuation of a role that never technically ends just because someone turns 18. The danger isn't any single act of generosity. It's the absence of a boundary around where generosity stops and self-preservation is allowed to begin. A boundary most parents never consciously draw until the math forces the conversation. If any part of this sounds like a spare bedroom in your own life that quietly became something bigger than intended, stay with this story, because what Teresa did next is worth hearing in full. The shift began with an unlikely source, her own mother, now 81, who called one Sunday just to talk and ended up mentioning, almost in passing, a similar arrangement she'd made decades earlier when Teresa's uncle moved back home in his 30s and stayed for nearly 6 years. "I told myself I was helping him find his footing," her mother said. "Really, I was just delaying it, and paying for the delay myself." Teresa sat with that sentence long after the call ended, recognizing an uncomfortable pattern stretching back further than she'd realized. The following weekend, Teresa sat down with both Jordan and Maya together, something she'd been avoiding for months, out of fear it would feel like rejection rather than honesty. She didn't lead with anger. She opened the spreadsheet on her laptop and simply showed them the number, $31,000, explained plainly what it represented in terms of her own retirement timeline, pushed further away with every passing month. Jordan's first reaction was defensive, insisting he was actively job searching, that this wasn't laziness, that he'd never once asked her to cut her own contributions to cover him. Teresa stopped him gently. "I'm not accusing either of you of taking advantage of me. I let this happen by never naming it." "That's on me as much as anyone." Maya, quieter than her brother, admitted she'd noticed the thermostat habit and the extra groceries without ever once asking what it actually added up to. Assuming, the way most people do inside a family, that if it were a real problem, someone would have said something by now. That reframing changed the tone of the entire conversation. Together, the three of them worked out something none of them had ever formally discussed before: a genuine household budget, with Jordan and Maya each contributing a fixed, modest amount toward shared expenses based on their actual current income, reviewed and adjusted every 3 months, rather than left as an open-ended assumption. It wasn't punitive. It was, for the first time, actually visible. Teresa also met with a financial counselor named Denise Okafor, who specialized in what she called boundary budgeting for parents supporting adult children. Denise gave her a single rule that reshaped how Teresa approached every request going forward. Before saying yes to any financial help, ask yourself one question first. Am I building a bridge, or am I becoming the floor? A bridge has an end date and a destination. A floor just gets stood on indefinitely. Teresa found herself repeating that question quietly to herself over the following months, especially during moments when guilt tried to talk her back into old patterns. Denise also helped Teresa restore her retirement contribution gradually, moving it back up from 4% to 7%, then eventually to 10%, funded largely by the new household contributions from Jordan and Maya, rather than by cutting anything further from her own remaining lifestyle. It wasn't an overnight fix. Some months Jordan's contribution came in late, and Teresa had to resist the old instinct to simply cover the gap quietly herself, rather than have an uncomfortable conversation about accountability. If you're still watching this, don't just judge Teresa's children, and don't only feel sorry for Teresa either. Ask yourself something more useful. Is there a bridge in your own life, financial or otherwise, that quietly stopped having an end date somewhere along the way? And if this story is resonating, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because these conversations rarely happen honestly out loud anywhere else. Teresa also did something Denise never explicitly asked of her. She brought the topic up with 3 other mothers from her school district, all of whom, it turned out, were quietly supporting adult children in some form, without ever discussing the actual dollar amounts with anyone, including each other. Over lunch one Friday, Teresa simply said, "I redirected $31,000 from my own retirement without meaning to. Has anyone else actually added up their real number?" The table went quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that usually means everyone's been doing private math they've never said aloud. One of the women, a longtime colleague named Patrice, finally admitted she'd been covering her son's car insurance and half his rent for nearly 3 years, never once tracking the total, afraid that adding it up would force a conversation she wasn't ready to have. By the end of that lunch, 2 of the 3 women admitted they needed to have the exact same spreadsheet conversation Teresa had just described, and the 4 of them agreed, half-jokingly, to check in with each other monthly the way people do with a diet or a workout plan, except this time the accountability was about honesty with their own children instead. This is the part of Teresa's story that tends to surprise people most. The turning point wasn't the moment Jordan finally landed a stable job, though that eventually happened too. It was the moment Teresa stopped treating her own retirement as something flexible enough to quietly absorb whatever her children needed, and started treating it as a fixed commitment deserving the same protection as any other bill in the house. Once that shift happened, helping her children stopped feeling like an either-or trade-off between love and security, and started feeling like something that could actually coexist with both, as long as it had visible edges. A year and a half after that retirement seminar slide first stopped her cold, Teresa's contribution rate sat at 11%, higher than it had been even before Jordan first moved back in. Maya had moved into her own apartment 8 months earlier, contributing what she could afford during the transition, checking in regularly rather than disappearing the way old patterns might have predicted. Jordan still lived at home, but now paid a fixed monthly amount tied to his actual income, reviewed honestly every quarter instead of assumed indefinitely. One evening, nearly 2 years after the spreadsheet conversation, Teresa's mother visited for dinner, and the 2 of them ended up back on the porch talking long after Jordan had gone up to his room. Her mother asked gently whether things had actually gotten easier since that difficult weekend conversation. Teresa considered it honestly before answering. "Easier isn't quite the word. More honest, maybe. I still help them. I just stopped pretending it doesn't cost anything, and stopped letting the cost decide itself without me in the room." Her mother nodded slowly, the way someone does when they recognize a lesson learned decades too late for themselves, glad to see it land in time for someone else. After a long pause, she added quietly, "I wish someone had handed me that bridge or floor question 40 years ago. I might have gotten your uncle out of that house a lot sooner, and kept a lot more for myself in the meantime." People who know Teresa today don't think of her as someone whose children took advantage of her. They think of her as the mother who figured out how to keep helping without quietly disappearing underneath the help itself, someone other parents in similar situations now call specifically to ask how she actually structured the conversation. She never forgot how close she came to reaching 60 with almost nothing rebuilt, simply because generosity without a boundary had quietly become a full-time unpaid arrangement she'd never consciously agreed to. Plenty of people assume supporting adult children is only a temporary inconvenience, something that resolves itself the moment the child finally gets back on their feet. But sometimes the real cost isn't the support itself. It's the absence of any visible edge around it, the assumption that love and financial boundaries can't exist in the same sentence. Teresa's retirement account didn't recover because her children moved out faster than expected. It recovered because she finally named what the arrangement actually cost: out loud, with real numbers, in a room where everyone could see them. You don't need 2 adult children back under your roof to understand this. You only need one financial bridge in your own life that quietly stopped having an end date. One form of ongoing generosity nobody has actually put a number on yet. Because staying vague about it might feel kinder in the short term, but it rarely protects anyone, including the people you're trying hardest to help. Here's a question worth sitting with, the same one Teresa still returns to on quieter evenings, usually while sitting alone on that same porch after everyone else has gone up to bed. What if that seminar slide had never crossed her path? How many more years might the reductions have continued? One reasonable exception at a time, before the number became too large to fully rebuild. And here's the one for you. Wherever you're watching this from tonight, maybe with a spare bedroom of your own that stopped feeling temporary a while ago. Where in your own life has generosity quietly lost its end date? And what might change the moment you put an actual number on what it's costing you? If this story reached something in you, don't let it wait until the gap is too wide to close comfortably. Like this video, share it with a parent who might need permission to name their own number out loud, instead of carrying it silently the way Teresa once did. And subscribe for more honest stories about people who learn to love without disappearing underneath it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.